Hello my friends, and welcome back to Meerkat Musings. I'm your host Ben, and I'm coming at you with part 2, as promised, of my thoughts on the Nintendo Switch 2 reveal, which happened last week. I haven't had a chance to do a video until today, so apologies for the gap. But on the other hand, this gap has also given an opportunity for some thoughts and feelings to filter through my brain and perhaps offer a little bit more than a knee-jerk reaction, because that's always, the possibility with anything like this. So here are some somewhat more considered and reflected thoughts on the Nintendo Switch 2. If we start with the hardware, then the grand reveal didn't really give us loads more than we already knew, although it did confirm, among other things, of course, the whole mouse thing with the controllers, which is still a bit weird to me. And we also kind of learned as to what the console can support in terms of high definition graphics, and the answer to that is it can do quite well. Especially when it's docked, it can be up to 4K in some instances, depending, of course, on the game and the telly. But the hardware itself, the Nintendo hardware itself, is able to handle that, which is great. Everything about it, of course, is bigger, which we already knew. The console itself, the controllers. Bigger screen means better resolution, and that has certainly been proven by some of the game demos, but more on that in a minute. And we have the usual refinements. I think it works with the Ambio things. You've got the kind of the magnetic connections now for the controllers, which might well feel quite satisfying to actually kind of snap into the console. There are a few people who have concerns about how that might be easy to break. All I can do on that score is assume that Nintendo have been vigorous in their considerations of that problem and designed it in such a way that it should be difficult to do. But we'll know when it's in the hands of the general public, won't we? As to how straightforward that is. And there's some new hardware features, such as the facility for kind of voice chat, now enabled directly through the controllers via the console, which has a built-in microphone. So Nintendo kind of had voice chat already for the Switch 1, but that was via a mobile phone app, which, as you can imagine, wasn't necessarily the best medium to do that. This is built into the hardware itself. It's only taken Nintendo probably about sort of a decade, if not more, to catch up to the rest of the games industry in that respect. But they now finally have built-in chat into their hardware. So there's that going on. I can only imagine how that will be for certain games like Mario Kart, for example. I can't speak for everyone, but there have been occasions when I've played Mario Kart online where I have gotten quite irritated, and my language has reflected my irritation. So me doing voice chat online with Mario Kart is a very bad idea. Nonetheless, that's a new feature, and there's also some accessories that I'll come to that relate to that, which are rather unusual choices, but again, this is Nintendo, so why wouldn't they be? In general terms, the hardware feels, or certainly looks, sleeker. I think I mentioned this in my last video. It looks more mature in some respects. A lot of the bright colours that we were associating with the original Switch, because the original Switch had a wide array of multicoloured Joy-Cons that kind of brighten it, shall we say. They seem to be, in the first instance at least, a little bit absent from this new iteration of the Switch. Whether or not Nintendo will do what they did before and bring out different coloured Joy-Cons in the future is anybody's guess. You'd kind of wager that they would. It's not a guarantee, but you'd wager that they would. We're going to see, as we had with the original Switch, we're going to see a Pro controller. There's going to be a Joy-Con docking station that charges the controllers, as we had before. And, of course, the Joy-Cons themselves can charge directly through the console when the console is in handheld mode or when it's docked and on charge. So all of that's basically as it was. The docking station, it actually is a little bit chunkier. It kind of has to be for one reason, of course, the obvious reason being a bigger console. But it also has a built-in fan to help keep the console cool when it's in use, when it's docked, which is a new feature to that, and that in principle should help keep performance stable when playing on the Switch 2. So that's a little bit different, a little bit new, and a welcome addition, I dare say, as well to the hardware. And on a kind of personal note, that's all I can really say about the hardware, really. I mean, I'm not going to deep dive into the processor and that kind of thing. The only thing I will say is the screen is an LCD screen. I think some people hoped it would be an OLED screen, but it's LCD, which presumably is about keeping costs down. That's been rumoured for a long time, to be fair. So it is what it is. It is a superior resolution to the original Switch, which isn't a shock. I mean, it's been more than 8 years since the first console, so it should be better. But it's not necessarily the all-seeing, all-dancing LED or OLED that people would hope for. That could change in the future. I mean, who knows? Maybe, as with the original Switch, there might be a Switch 2 Pro. You never know. Well, I mean, to be fair, there wasn't really a Switch Pro, was there? But there could be a Switch 2, OLED edition or something like that. We could see something like that. I'm not going to hold my breath at this point, but it's certainly possible based on the history. Moving on to the accessories in more detail now. There's going to be a Pro controller. As I say, Nintendo kind of showed that off in their big reveal. And of course, as we know, there's Joy-Cons. And there's also going to be a camera, a webcam, for lack of a better term, from Nintendo for the Switch 2, which will plug into the top USB-C port and enable video feeds and therefore, combined with a microphone, of course, video chat. Interesting idea. Not entirely certain as to how gimmicky that will be. The theory is that it will be more immersive when playing certain games. You can share like sort of game screens and that kind of thing. Potential for abuse? Well, probably, as we tend to see with a lot of these things. But with a bit of luck, everything will be fine on that score. I don't necessarily think at 50 quid I'm particularly interested in investing in the camera. And, well, I mean, I could actually kind of go into more detail in a minute or two about the pricing. But, yeah, I mean, there's lots of reasons why, at first glance, a lot of these accessories will be beyond the scope of my budget. We've got probably going to be other accessories, of course, in time. In fact, there will also be the options to buy separate spare docking stations, charging cables, etc., so all the usual stuff. One thing Nintendo have stressed on their website is that some of the older stuff, so the Switch 1 charger, for example, is not capable of powering the Switch 2. It's not powerful enough. This should be obvious, but Nintendo put it out there anyway. The Switch 1 docking station, you can't put the Switch 2 in it. It's too big. So people should forget that idea immediately. Again, it simply wouldn't power the console anyway, and it's not compatible. You can use Switch 1 Joy-Cons and the Switch 1 Pro controller with the Switch 2. Exactly to what degree, I don't know. Games which are made from the ground up for the Switch 2 probably wouldn't accept Switch 1 controllers. It just probably wouldn't work. But yeah, there'll be some forwards compatibility, I think, as they call it, with the controllers. So you don't need to get rid of your original Pro controller or your Joy-Cons. You can use them. What you can't do is, for example, charge the Joy-Cons, the Mark 1 Joy-Cons on the Switch 2. You can't physically connect them. So that's not going to happen. But you'll be able to use them with some Switch 2 games. And speaking of games, the console is said to be, the Switch 2 is said to be backwards compatible with a lot of the original Switch 1 game catalogue, but not all of it. Something Nintendo have stressed. The new console will use game cartridges which are virtually identical to the Switch 1 game cartridges, except these ones are going to be red rather than grey, in order to obviously distinguish them. Some people have voiced a concern that it seems that some of these cartridges will be nothing more than key codes to unlock downloads, and that Nintendo might be charging a lot of money for this. More on that in a minute. What else? Internal storage. The original Switch had 32 gigabytes of internal storage. The Switch 2 has 256, 8 times as much, with the option, as before, to increase that with the use of micro SD cards. However, these have to be specific micro SD cards, micro SD Express cards, XC or something like that. I don't know. It's on the Nintendo website, but there is a specific requirement there for the type of SD card. Nonetheless, it's an option, so you can expand the memory, which is great. And, well, this, to be fair, was kind of revealed in the last great big Switch 1 Nintendo Direct back at the end of March. There's going to be a bunch of stuff to do with kind of passing on game data, save data. It should be reasonably straightforward to transfer from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2, obviously depending on the game and depending on whether or not it can play on the Switch 2. But Nintendo have kind of made that into what hopefully should be a fairly straightforward, fairly seamless option. So lots going on, of course, with that. If you have a Nintendo Online, Nintendo Switch account, you should be able to sort of access that straight away. Speaking of that, actually, if you happen to have the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, then you will be able to, from day one, access a new library of Nintendo games based on the GameCube. Nintendo are going to be putting GameCube games via the online service onto the Switch 2. And that will include, I think at launch, the Wind Waker, Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, will be finding itself available to play via this online service on the Switch 2. So that's a thing, which will be nice. The Wind Waker I thought was quite a good game. Certainly very beautiful in its own way. So that's making its way across. And also making its way across will be remastered editions of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So these, of course, were the two big Zelda games on the original Switch. And they'll be getting kind of a bit of extra treatment for the Switch 2. They're going to be graphically enhanced, and there's some kind of app feature you can take advantage of as well for both games. Now, I don't know what it will cost, because if you've got the original games, in principle there's a cost involved to upgrade them to the Switch 2 editions. What that cost is, I don't know. I do know that if you happen to be a subscriber to the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack thing, that these upgrades won't cost you anything. So that's a bit of a relief. I happen to be someone who subscribes to that service, and as far as this is concerned, I'm grateful for that, because I'm not sure I'd want to pay to have better graphics on games that I've sort of kind of done, dusted and completed. And the graphics are better. Don't get me wrong, the Switch 2 runs these games in a very smooth way. They look gorgeous. I don't know if they are a metaphoric leap forward. They're not metaphoric, that's the wrong word. You know what I mean? They're not. It's not such a tremendous jump that I think Nintendo can justify charging a lot of money to upgrade the games. But as I say, I don't know what the pricing structure is. I do know what the pricing structure is for the console, as does the entire world by now. It launches on the 5th of June, and in the UK, I think the price points are £395 for the Switch 2 on its own, or £429 for the Switch 2 bundled with Mario Kart World, which is the big, if you like, the big launch title for this new hardware. So, bearing in mind it's about a 35 quid price difference, I think a lot of people will probably go for the edition with Mario Kart bundled in, because otherwise, there's lots of talk about how on its own Mario Kart World will cost between 70 to 80 quid. So why wouldn't you do it as a bundle? It doesn't make sense to buy the console on its own, then buy the game. You're fleecing yourself out of money. So, unless you're really dead set against Mario Kart and don't have any intention to play it, you might as well buy it with the game. So that's where the price points kind of live for the consoles, and as of course suggested, the games. Well, certainly Mario Kart is set to debut at a fairly high price point, particularly for Nintendo, and that has raised a few questions about what else might be somewhat highly priced. And it does seem like there could be a broadly higher price point for a lot of this stuff than we saw before with the original Switch. That's not to say the original Switch didn't have slightly more expensive titles. I mean, I think Tears of the Kingdom was about 50 quid, but seeing these prices ramp up considerably, especially when Nintendo haven't historically done that, is something that's got fans talking, and not in a good way. And I agree, it's somewhat unfortunate. The Switch 2 base edition, if you like, is coming in at about 120 quid, I think, more expensive than the Switch 1 did at launch. I think the Switch 1 launched for 279, something like that, here in the UK. So there's a bit of a jump in price for the hardware straight away. And of course, the thing about that is that historically Nintendo have never really lowered their prices. The Switch 1 has always been roughly the same sort of price and has rarely ever dipped. So the Switch 2 seems likely to possibly follow a similar pattern. And if the software is more expensive, then, well, I mean, I think it means people will have to be, I know I, for one, will have to be more, I guess, discerning as to what games I buy, because I'm not necessarily going to fork out 70 to 80 quid for a game if I have any doubts as to whether or not I'm going to enjoy it. So there's going to be a little bit of that sort of going on. I guess, to be fair to Nintendo, their new pricing, if this is going to be the norm, and we don't know what the other prices of other games would be just yet, it brings them roughly in line with where Sony in particular with the PlayStation have been playing for many, many years. A lot of PlayStation games will be 60, 70 quid, if not more. And you look at certain games, and certain special edition games, for example, and they're 90 quid to 100 quid. The next big game thing, as it were, is going to be GTA 6. People think that might be 100 quid. So these price points that Nintendo are now operating at are not necessarily unprecedented for the industry. In fact, they're not unprecedented for the industry. It's just a bit unprecedented for Nintendo. And a lot of people have been kind of jumping up and down about how they want Nintendo to immediately sort of lower their prices, which, let's face it, Nintendo are not going to do. It is a bit disappointing if they are selling game cartridges, which are nothing more than download keys, then and charging more for those, then basically they're charging an extra 10 quid for a piece of plastic with a code in it, which is a bit naughty and I dare say a bit disappointing from the point of view of a lifelong Nintendo fan. So that's my thoughts and feelings along those lines with pricing. And I think that's as I say, it's not ideal, it's not great, it's not brilliant, but it is what it is. It's how Nintendo plan to operate going forward, and we just have to grit our teeth and bear it with that, don't we? Anything else to do with the Switch 2? Any personal thoughts on the Switch 2? I don't know if I'll buy it at day one. In all honesty, I mean, it's a cost thing, of course. For the most part, it's not going to be cheap. I have other needs, as it were. I have other priorities. So 400 quid, 430 quid is a lot to ask for in one kind of hit. I mean, I don't know if there'll be the options in some places to kind of spread that cost out a little bit. But I'm not yet remotely certain that I'll be plumping for the Switch 2 on day dot. I'd like to, of course I would, but yeah, it all comes down to money, as these things always do. Going forward, I mean, I can certainly see the Switch 2 in my future, and I can certainly see Mario Kart World in my future. Other games on the way include, this is quite kind of like a fairly big one for Nintendo, Cyberpunk 2077, which had, of course, a much maligned launch when it debuted, mostly I think because of its performance on the PS4, is coming to the Switch 2. The Hitman series is landing. There's some reasonably big games coming to the Switch 2, which look quite good and quite immersive. So there could be a lot to kind of tantalise software-wise, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm intrigued. I am interested, but I just have to wait and see for a number of different reasons, including, of course, pricing among other things. So that's my thought, as it were. That's my kind of lowdown on the Switch 2's reveal, and that's it. So we'll just have to kind of chew on that a little bit and decide from there what we want to do going forward as to whether or not we buy one. Watch this space.